Hello, welcome back. My name's Mariah. This is episode 3 of reading the 100 books you should read in your lifetime, or the list as I call it to everyone that I mention it to in real life. Last episode was a bit of a bummer. We had some duds. I've already chosen my first book for this video. You'll see it in the B-roll, but that is going to be Animal Farm by George Orwell, so hopefully not a dud, because I did read 1984 for episode 1 and I really enjoyed it. I don't know what this is about. Again, another book that most people read in school and that my shitty education did not have me do, so we'll see. It's like less than 150 pages it looks like. I know I think it's essentially an uprising of farm animals. That's all I could say. I mean, there's a pig on this cover. I think a pig is the main character. And it's just the animals overtake the humans. And obviously that's going to be some kind of metaphor. We'll see what kind of metaphor it is when I read it. But yeah, that is the introduction for this vlog. I will update probably, with this being so short, I will probably just read this all in one go and come back with an update. Hopefully I get a longer book soon, because there are a lot of long books on this list, and so far everything I've read has been pretty much under 300 pages, with the exception of Birdsong, which was I think slightly more than 400, but like there are some tomes. Les Mis is on here, The Count of Monte Cristo. I don't want to be reading those books back to back, so we need to go ahead and get one of them out of the way. It doesn't have to be as long as those two, but like if anything 500 plus, I don't want to be reading side by side. We need to get one of those bigger books out of the way. Hopefully we can do that in this video, and hopefully this video will be more of a success than the last one, but I'll just have to check my next clip to find out. See ya. Hello, welcome back. I have finished Animal Farm. I took a bit of a break from this series. Not that, I mean, you would really be able to tell too much, but if you saw my last video, you know why. I was a sad gal, so Reading classics wasn't what I wanted to do at the moment, but we're back and we're starting off with a good one, because I did actually end up giving Animal Farm 5 stars. I think this book is hilarious. I did not know going into this that this was a satire and essentially George Orwell insulting the Soviet Union. Like, that's what this is. I knew that it's the basic premise of it. I just didn't know the historical context. But I really ended up enjoying this. It was short and to the point. There was no subtlety, but subtlety was not the intention with this book, so I can appreciate that. I liked that there was a lot of foreshadowing in this, a lot of similar discussions to 1984, obviously just with a completely different genre. And I think as far as books that I will think about more, I think 1984 will stick with me longer, but I gave that one a 4 stars just because there were certain aspects that I didn't love about it, such as the misogyny and this random, like, a big chunk in the center that's like so boring. But this one didn't really have anything that I felt like I could critique, so that's why I gave it 5 stars. Like I said, it's short, sweet, to the point, knows exactly what it wants to do. Yeah, this is essentially a cautionary tale about believing in, I guess, leaders or a concept too much and too blindly. Obviously, it's a direct comparison to communism and the Soviet Union, but we see these characters or these animals start off with good intentions of wanting freedom, and it all sounds nice, but then it immediately starts devolving into what exactly what they were wanting to free themselves from. Like, literally the first thing that they do, they say that they don't want to become like the humans, but the first thing they do after the revolution is adopt a human construct, which is the commandments. They create 7 commandments instead of 10, but we see that happen right away, and they consistently keep adopting more human constructs. Obviously, the pigs are at the forefront of this with Napoleon. I will say there's apparently, with Napoleon and Snowball having their tension at the beginning, that Snowball was apparently supposed to be another Soviet leader, not Stalin. Trotsky, I think, is maybe his name. I don't know anything about that guy, so I can't speak about that comparison, but we do see Snowball seems to still be power hungry. I think any politician is, and the pigs in this were certainly politicians, but it seemed like his desire to, like, develop this windmill that we see a lot throughout the story was intended to make life easier for the whole of the farm. So I wonder if maybe he was supposed to be reflect more of like a socialist aspect or socialist idealism, since the windmill creating energy, it would provide the most benefit for the most people. I could be incorrect in what I think socialism is, maybe, but he clearly, there is kind of a differentiation between him and Napoleon, who wants to focus on force, and that's exactly what he does, and he forces Snowball out and he becomes the dictator, aka Stalin. I did think the character Squealer was very funny, because I was not expecting, first off, the name is so fitting, because he squeals a bunch of bullshit, man. Like, he's the spin doctor in this situation. He's constantly gaslight, girl boss, gatekeep, you know, that kind of stuff. He's manipulating everything. He's manipulating the animals' memories, which is a similar concept to 1984. We see, like, the commandments get altered, and Squealer kind of talking in circles and implying that people are remembering things incorrectly. So there's that similar concept of, like, the manipulation of history or the editing of history in these totalitarian societies that we see in both Animal Farm and 1984. And as this goes on for all the other animals on the farm, life just reverts back to what it was when they were under the farmer, Mr. Jones. And they're saying in their minds that it must be better because they're at least free. They've chosen this for themselves, but really they've just switched one dictator for another. And we see the animals get harmed for speaking out and having fear of speaking out and being disposed of when they're no longer of use. So really drastic, horrible things happening to them, but then them still kind of standing by, well, it must be better than what we were dealing with before. And of course, the pigs being at the top of this, I think the ending of this is probably really infamous, where the last paragraph, the pigs are sitting at a table with the neighboring farmers, and they're having an argument, and all the other animals are looking in, and they say that suddenly something's off about the pigs' faces, and they realize that the pigs have become indistinguishable from the humans. So this is just like a short, sweet cautionary tale, and I really enjoyed it. I do think he was going kind of for a parable or a fairy tale aspect in this, and it really, obviously with the whimsical nature of like having a bunch of talking animals, that there's that, but I think just the structure of the story and how he pulled it all together really does give that fairy tale vibe. And I really, really enjoyed this. I was not expecting for it to be funny. And that was such a nice like change of pace and nice surprise. So I'm glad I read this. I do understand why both of these books are on this list, because they tackle similar topics, but they're so different. And I think 1984 like deserves 100% to be on this list. I think this one is more for kind of the impact that it had on its time and on people's feelings towards the communist movement in Russia. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. My copy is falling apart, unfortunately. I did get this for like $1 at a thrift store, so that's to be expected. I'll fix it at some point, but I wanted to update that I did finish that, and I'm gonna go ahead and choose my next book to read in this episode. Ew. Oh dear. Okay. Well, I have the book. I own it. I got it for really cheap. It's The Help. I'm not excited to read this book. From what The Help, from what I understand, is like the epitome of a white savior book. So yeah, I'm not excited to read it. And it's surprisingly long, but it's on the list. I'll pick it up. Hopefully it won't be as bad as I'm anticipating, but I do not have high hopes. At least we started out with a good one, but it might go downhill from here. We'll have to see. That is a longer book, so I'll update once I'm halfway through. Hopefully I'm pleasantly surprised. Hopefully it's not as bad as I'm anticipating, but only time will tell, and I'll see you then. Bye. Hello. I look slightly different from the last update, but I wanted to come on and say that I finished The Help by Catherine Stockett. I did not update halfway through because I didn't think I would have any more to say when I finished it. And I was right. My issues remain the same throughout this entire book. I thought it was a white savior story going into it, and I was right. It was, and I did not appreciate that. I don't know why this would be on the list. We already had To Kill a Mockingbird, so like, what was the point of this? Also, this was written in 2009, and frankly, I'm surprised something this offensive was published then. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but like, the author mentions it in their author's note that they were worried about potentially like crossing a line when they wrote from a Black woman's perspective, and she absolutely did. I don't know why she acknowledges like, oh, I was worried about this, but then continued to do it, because she wrote in not only a Black narrative. Two Black women are the main characters, and then there's the white woman who's the white savior of the story. But not only did she write that Black narrative, she wrote in Black dialect. So immediately from paragraph 1, it was offensive to read. This white woman should not be writing out like, I don't know if it would technically be AAVE. It's kind of more like, reminds me of like Zora Neale Hurston, that style of speech where it's like an older Black dialect rather than modern AAVE, but like their entire narrative is written that way. And it's one thing if Zora Neale Hurston does that because she's a Black woman, and then another thing if a white woman in 2009 is writing it. It was just very off the bat offensive, uncomfortable to read. I did not appreciate that. I mean, there were stereotypes as well, especially with like Black men. Pretty much every husband or father we see in this story, as far as Black men go, they were either absent or they were abusive. And there was no real representation of a good father figure within this Black community. So I understand, having read the author's note, that this is being inspired by her own maid growing up who had an abusive husband, but it's harmful to represent Black men only in that way. And so yeah, immediately glaringly obvious issues with that. I ended up giving this 2 stars simply because it was fine to read, as I wasn't like slogging through it, but it was, like I said, offensive and uncomfortable to read at times. And then our main character, our white main character, she's like writing this book about the maids in her small town in Mississippi, and she gets this idea after Abilene, one of the Black main characters, telling her about her son wanting to write a book about what it's like to work for white men. Her son passed away, and then like a couple chapters later, this white woman comes up to her saying she wants to write pretty much the same thing. And nobody addresses that she essentially stole the creative idea of this dead Black man. Not even his mother. Like, she's all for it. This conversation at no point is brought up, and every time that like Skeeter, I don't know if I said that was her name, it's a horrible name, but Skeeter, the main white woman in this, every time like there's criticism from someone in the Black community, they're kind of antagonized. Nobody actually takes that criticism seriously, like sides with Skeeter, which it really like drove home the whole white savior aspect of this. There's also additionally like a really awkward scene with a naked man in the yard of a different maid's employer, and then the maid tries to like drive him away, but he attacks her, and then the white woman she works for comes out and like beats this naked man with a poker. So the whole story is a white savior story, and then I guess to make us like this other white woman more, she just threw in her own little white savior moment. It was random and it wasn't necessary because we had already seen enough of this woman and her dynamic with her maid to know she's like not objectively an evil person. So it was unnecessary. It was over the top and it was weird. And then there were some other things that I didn't love. Like there was a romance in this and it was, in my opinion, unnecessary. I guess it was like kind of for the main character's development because she grows a spine at some point during this story, and like I feel like the first time we kind of see a semblance of said spine is when she first meets this guy and he's being a complete douchebag. And then it would have been fine if that was like the only time he showed up, but he shows up later and they actually get in a relationship, and it's ridiculous. It's not necessary. It has nothing to do really with the main storyline of the book, nor do I think it's a good relationship, which I at least think the author acknowledges that part. So I didn't care for that. There were also just like some random comments that were offensive. Like there was one about not trusting Indians. So I don't know where that came from or why the author felt that was necessary to be in the story. So yeah, there were just some lines overall that I didn't love. Overall, I mean, like I said, it was easy enough to read. I wasn't like dragging my way through it, hating every second. It's just that this had a lot of issues with not a lot of payout. I mean, the whole moral of the story is discovering that like these like racial lines that they don't want to cross are something that's being implemented by society, whereas in naturally people, black or white, are just people, and these lines are unnecessary. And I don't think that's something that is like revolutionary, especially not coming from a white woman who had a black maid and was raised by a black maid. But yeah, that's what the story overall and the moral of it was. I feel like we got, in the end, got a lot of good things for this white main character and not so much good things for our black main characters. So it really, there is such an imbalance in that it ended on a frustrating note as well. And I was never really convinced that the main white woman was concerned about the danger that she was potentially putting these black maids in for writing stories about their actual lives and the work that they did for the other white women in this town. She would mention that she was worried about it, but then she would be, to me, more concerned with the book and with the publisher that she was working with. And so it does really rub me the wrong way when things turned out so well for her, but not so much for the black woman in this story. It seemed to kind of undermine what the author was trying to get at. But yeah, that's this book. I will not be keeping it. It's 2 stars. I do not think it deserves to be on the list, but alas, it was there, and I now know what it is, because I know it was like a pretty popular book and movie at one point, so I can at least say I've read it. But moving on, I'm gonna spin the wheel and figure out what my next book is for this video, and hopefully it will not be another white savior story. I don't know how many of those are on this list, so we'll see. I'll let you guys see it first. Can you see? Oh, there's an ad. Close. There was an ad for a gay test. I don't need that. I already know I'm queer. Anyways, I'm not sure you can see this at all. No. It's Wuthering Heights. I knew I would have to do it someday. I didn't read it in high school when it was assigned to me, so I guess this is my punishment. Well, I'm back. And here's Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I couldn't have told you that. I know there's multiple Brontes. I get them mixed up. I was supposed to read this book in high school. I think I read the first chapter, and it was overly descriptive for no reason. I think it's actually, that might just be a trademark of like Gothic literature, and I may be able to respect it more now that I'm not being told to read it and I'm choosing to. I mean, the will told me to, but I could just say no to this challenge, but I won't. I will read Wuthering Heights, and I will not romanticize Heathcliff. Honestly, don't know too much about this, even though like I took tests on it in high school. I know it's about Heathcliff, and is her name Isabel? Catherine? My bad. He's like in love with her, but he's not a rich man, and they can't be together, and blah blah blah. And it's kind of like his obsession with her and how it continues throughout his entire life, and it's not healthy. That's all I can say. Everybody swoons over Heathcliff, but I'm like, this man beat his wife and his child, so what do you mean? What do you mean you're a simp for Heathcliff? I'm glad he's dead. Spoilers. No, just, I haven't read it, obviously, or haven't read it in full, but like I know what happens, and it pissed me off. It pissed me off the way that my English teacher in high school romanticized Heathcliff. It pisses me off when I see people just like on social media romanticizing him. I do not like the man, but maybe Emily isn't romanticizing him. Maybe it's just the pop culture of it all that's romanticizing him. I could be totally wrong. We'll just have to see, because I didn't actually read this book. So I still haven't gotten a super long book from this list, because this one, does it start on page 1? Starts on page 3 and ends on 323. You know, I would have thought that this was longer. It's only 320 pages, so that's not crazy, even though if I'm remembering correctly, it's kind of dense writing, but I'll get through it. I will make my way through this book if it's the last thing I do. But yeah, this is the next one. I feel like I should have stuff to update by the second half, or in the middle, so I will hopefully check back in when I'm halfway through this book, unless I have no thoughts, in which case I'll check back in when I finish it. But hopefully I'll have thoughts, because this is more of like a profound classic than The Help. So wish me luck. I'll see you later. Hello, I am back to discuss what I have read so far of Wuthering Heights. I am over halfway through, and this is definitely better than it was in high school. Not that I actually read it. I think I read like a chapter and then read Spark Notes for the rest. But I guess this should be expected. Like, anything is better when it's not assigned for you to read. When you're doing it in your own time, it's just more fun. And this book is fucking ridiculous. I would compare it to a soap opera. Like, these characters, especially the main two, Heathcliff and Catherine, are so dramatic and intense, and they all suck. So that is one thing I've realized. This kind of like romanticization of Heathcliff is completely done by the audience. I figured that out almost as soon as I started reading this. Even Charlotte Bronte has a little section at the beginning where she's talking about the book, and she's like, Heathcliff sucks. So it's definitely not the author who's contributing to that romanticization of him. It's, I guess, the modern view, this like unhealthy obsession that some women have with toxic men, and it's gross. It's gross that my English teacher kind of contributed to that as well. But no, he is 100% a bad person, and this book does not shy away from that. It's highlighting that. I think that's kind of the point of the story, is seeing him and all the other people just manipulating and tormenting each other. That's why I think it's like a soap opera. It's one of those things where it's like a car crash that I can't look away from. I've heard people say that phrase. I personally look away from car crashes because I don't want to see that. But yeah, it's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's too much. But I will admit it's kind of a fun time. So maybe I do understand that phrase after all. I can't look away, and I don't understand why these people are like this. But to get into more context of what I'm thinking, the first impression that we get of Heathcliff is obviously him after a lot of the events of Wuthering Heights have occurred, because we are being told the story of Catherine and Heathcliff and all their relatives in the future after a large portion of these people have passed away. We're immediately seeing him as this kind of suspicious of others kind of person, someone who is reserved and violent. And there is this aspect of him even when he's younger, where he's coveting what other people have. And obviously a lot of things have been taken from him by Hindley, which is Catherine's brother. Hindley has like this, I believe it's also done out of jealousy, because his father treated Heathcliff so well. He took everything away from Heathcliff that was given to him by Henley's father, and treated him as a servant rather than a brother, which he was essentially raised to be. And so obviously that's where this resentment and this need for revenge comes from. But Heathcliff takes it absolutely too far, extends it past Henley into his children, all of his relatives. It becomes almost an obsession, his need for vengeance. It doesn't stop with the person who's wronged him the most, which would be Henley. It extends to anyone who's even slightly wronged him. Catherine, Edgar, who, my God, has done nothing. He's the most soft-hearted person in this book, but he just happened to marry Catherine, and then he gets raked through the mud. Poor man. And there is this relationship between Catherine and Heathcliff. It goes on from them being children into their adult lives up until Catherine dies, which she does like halfway through the book. And I think a lot of this, and I'm seeing themes of it, is this idealization of past relationships and people in general. I think despite knowing how bad the other is, Catherine and Heathcliff, they both suck. Catherine is obviously, she manipulates Heathcliff in many ways. She kind of has this two-faced attitude. She'll act one way with her husband Edgar and then another way with Heathcliff. And so he resents her for that, and she resents him for not being there for her. And it's just them. Every time they're together, they're drawn together, but every time they're together, they hurt each other. I feel like this would be good for fans of, what is it called? Magnolia Parks? Because that's like a description that I've heard. It's like this magnetic pull, but they are so bad for each other, yet they keep coming back. It's like that dynamic, and I think that pulls from them having that close relationship as children, how they're still like kind of looking for that person that they were close to earlier in life. Even though that person has obviously grown and changed, they're still being pulled back to that. And we see kind of that theme with other characters as well, like Lockwood. When he first meets Heathcliff, he like kind of places a lot of his own attributes onto Heathcliff, making him immediately like him, but then so kind of giving him that, like, I don't know, I guess he wouldn't be the best example. Isabel would be a better example. She sees Heathcliff and the relationship that he has with Catherine, how intense and like intimate it is, and she idealizes this and it takes it as what love should be, and him being like this kind of heroic character in their love story, and she pines after him because of that. But obviously, as once they get married, he shows her the real him, and which she'd seen peaks of, but had kind of melded into this dream person, rather than seeing them as the red flags they were. And so I think that's where a lot of this like magnetic pull is rooted from. Additionally, Catherine at one time laments about how she's grown older and she wishes things were back to the way they were when she was younger. And so I think that's where this toxic relationship is really rooted in. It's rooted in them wanting to be who they were when they were young and have those same relationships, even though bridges have been burned and they can't go back to that. I'm gonna cut this short because my camera battery is flashing, but I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. It's really, I'd be interested in like knowing the psychology behind this. If a psychologist or a psychiatrist, I can't remember the difference, were to read this book and diagnose these characters, I'd be interested, because there's a lot going on, a lot of codependency and like over obsession and over attachment to one another, that is unhealthy and that really shouldn't be romanticized. I think most people nowadays would know that. I'm just shocked by the amount of romanticizing Heathcliff I saw in like previous years. It's absurd to me, but I'd be interested in like hearing a potential diagnosis about them, especially Catherine, because she seems to actually go into some sort of state of hysteria and then she gives birth. So I don't know if Emily Bronte is trying to say that that's what pregnancy is like. I hope not. especially since they didn't mention that she was pregnant at all until she actually gave birth. But it's interesting to read about. I am enjoying it. There more than I expected. Like I said, it gives that soap opera vibe, and it's clearly not a good relationship. There's a lot of like intense, almost violent expressions of love on Heathcliff's part, but he doesn't actually act on that. So with Catherine being sick, he's not caring for her. He's delegating that responsibility to someone else, but at the same time declaring his love for Catherine. And those two things just do not add up. So clearly, just throughout this entire relationship, it's not good. And that dynamic with those two is now done, because in the first half of this book, the very middle of this book, Catherine dies. She dies after giving birth, and now we're going forward seeing how Heathcliff's need for revenge is going to impact his child and Catherine's child, who's also named Catherine, and Henley's child, and how this hatred is going to spread generationally. So I'm interested to see what goes on there. Obviously, we don't have that same dynamic with Heathcliff and Catherine, but it looks like based on the family tree at the beginning of this book, there's maybe some new dynamics with Kathy and the other two children. They are cousins, but in this time period, it's normal for cousins to have romantic relationships. So I don't know if we're gonna see like a complete repetition of these toxic dynamics. We are already seeing some unfortunate choices as far as raising these children, which I'll talk more about once I finish the book. But yeah, that's where I'm at. This has been a whirlwind of dramatics with everyone involved in this book, but I admit there's something addictive about reading it and seeing how absurd these characters can be. But yeah, my camera battery is flashing, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up and check back in once I've finished the book. Bye. Well, I am back to finish off my thoughts about, oh, it's upside down, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I finished this a few days ago. I let it sit, and I think I should just go ahead and get this out of the way because I have a rant. I unfortunately did stumble across the new Wuthering Heights adaptation trailer. I don't usually watch trailers, and I don't think it's gonna be good. I don't think it's gonna be an accurate adaptation. I think it's gonna frustrate me like the Frankenstein adaptation did. But what makes me angry is that the tagline for this is the greatest love story of all time. Love? No. This is not a love story. Catherine and Heathcliff have some weird attachment, but it's not love. It's obsession, and it's an absurd level of codependency that is honestly disgusting. Like, to call something as toxic as this romance is absurd. And I know it's been done in the past, but I feel like it's 2025. We should know the difference between mess and romance. I don't blame people for liking this book because it's not a bad book. And I don't blame people for finding like messy romances or relationships to be addicting to read or watch. That's fine. It's fiction. But do not romanticize something that we all know is unhealthy. Because it's not a good ideal to look up to. We shouldn't be presenting it as like this fun, beautiful, I want to be with a man like this kind of thing, because God, no, you do not. And I don't think, other than like the last line of this book, I don't think Emily Bronte was presenting this as a romance in any way, because not only is Heathcliff bad, Catherine's bad. The young Catherine isn't all that great either. No one in this book is a good person, except for maybe Edgar. That poor man. He gets shit on so much, but he's like the only decent person. So it pisses me off that it's being presented in the same way that it has been in the past, the way that made me not want to read this book to begin with, because I knew how toxic the relationship was, and I didn't want to read a book that presented that as a romance. And I was happy to read this book and find out that that's not the case. It is messy, it's meant to be messy, but none of these people are meant to be liked. And it's very clear from the way that they speak to and about each other that that is the case. And then going and seeing this whole romanticized portrayal shoved in my face again, like it's coming out on Valentine's Day. No. It's wrong. It's something that I just think that at this day and age we would have gotten past. I understand that like the whole brooding bad boy situation is fun in theory, but in practice, no. So that's my soapbox. I'll get off of it now, but this is not a romance. I just want to make sure everyone knows that. That being said, I don't dislike this book. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 3.5 stars, and I may keep it. I'm gonna have to think on this one a little bit, because if I end up deciding to keep a classic, then I'm gonna get a nicer edition than the one I have. So I'll hold on to this, and if something nicer comes up, like a nicer copy comes up before I get rid of this one, then I'll transfer all my tabs. Yeah, I'm a little iffy on that one. I don't know if I'll actually come back to this. But yeah, overall, like, it's an interesting story to read. It is a mess, and it is like an addictive read that still stands even after Catherine dies and the original like messy relationship is gone. We still have the absolute shit show that is their children. Because my God, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree with some of these kids. So the second half of this book does essentially start with the birth of Kathy and the death of her mother, Catherine. For the sake of not being confusing, I'm just going to refer to her child, the younger Catherine, as Kathy. And when I refer to Catherine, it's the original Catherine Earnshaw. Just getting that out of the way, because Emily Bronte, for some reason, decided to make everything confusing as hell. So it starts out with that, and Heathcliff obviously is not very happy, even though he was being a little shit to Catherine before she died. He suddenly can't live without her. He can't live without his soul, as he says. Except later he says that when Catherine, her like image, appears to him later in life before he dies, that she appears to him the way she often did in life, as a devil. So like it is such a strange dynamic, and it's not romantic. Maybe some of the lines that he says, like referring to her as his soul, his life, that can in a vacuum sound very romantic. He's got some levels of charm to him. But we do not live in a vacuum, and we do not read this story in a vacuum, so it's very clear that as a whole, this is not a romantic gesture. This is the gesture of a man who is obsessed with a woman who is not good for him. And that feeling is mutual. They, for whatever reason, constantly yearn for each other, have this pull towards each other, this connection that was rooted in their childhood, growing up together. But every time they're together, they hurt each other. It's a constant cycle. So it's an interesting relationship to read about. It's an unhealthy dynamic, but it is not romantic in any way. But we don't get much of that dynamic anymore after, obviously, Catherine passes away. We do still get Heathcliff wanting revenge on people who have done him no wrong, and of people who are dead. Because Hindley, I guess the main portion of his revenge, the person that's done him wrong, is Henley, Catherine's brother. He dies shortly after her. So the main person who has done him wrong is gone. But he extends that torment, that revenge, to his child. Same for Catherine. He wanted revenge on her for not loving him or not being with him the way he wanted her to. And he also doesn't like Edgar or his wife Isabel, who's Edgar's sister. So he's getting revenge on all of their offspring by just tormenting them and putting them in situations where he can manipulate them. He does end up having a child with Isabel, who's born not too long after Kathy is born. Isabel has fled. She's no longer there. The first 13 years of Linton's life, which is their son, the first 13 years of his life were spent away from Heathcliff with Isabel. And eventually Isabel passes away and Edgar takes in Linton. Of course, Heathcliff can't have this. He can't have the child and nephew of two people he feels have done him wrong, that he hates. He can't have him be in a good household with his uncle and cousin. He has to take Linton as his own, and he often does refer to him as property. And he uses Linton, who is sickly, as a way to manipulate Kathy, because Kathy, she's not the worst person. She does things I don't like, but she is not the worst person. She's very kind-hearted, at least towards people that she feels deserves it. She's very rude to Hareton, her other cousin, which was Henley's son, and that's why I don't like her as a character. I think she just kind of rolls with how Linton views Hareton, and Linton is a little bitch boy who does not like Hareton because he's not as educated as Linton. So yeah, she just kind of rolls with that, but Heathcliff does use Linton and his illness to manipulate Kathy, but Linton also uses his illness to manipulate Kathy and get what he wants. So, like father, like son, even though he didn't raise Linton, Linton does still have these aspects to him that are a lot like Heathcliff. And Heathcliff is very self-aware of what he's doing. It's not as if it's a subconscious thing. He actually acknowledges that he can sympathize with Hareton because of the way he grew up in kind of a similar situation, being less than the children around him. But regardless of this sympathy, he throws it aside and he says, I understand his suffering, I sympathize with his suffering, but I'm going to make his suffering so much worse. Because of how Hareton's father treated him. But Hareton views Heathcliff as a father. He's the only character that mourns him when he eventually dies. So it's such an interesting and fucked up dynamic to read about. Again, I understand why people like this book, because it's just the interactions between some of these characters, the relationships between some of these characters, though they are the most unhealthy thing I've ever seen, are extremely complex. And I do not have the education to kind of break down why some of these people feel the way they do, why there's this level of dependency on each other, or why, despite everything that Heathcliff put him through, Hareton would still have like this attachment, this like view him as a paternal figure, because he was just not a paternal person. He didn't act like Hareton's father. It's just his father passed away when he was 5, and this was the father figure that he had, the adult male that he had in his life, other than Joseph, who he did actually take a lot of attributes after and was around a lot. So it seems more like he viewed him as like a friend, potentially a grandfather, considering Joseph's age, rather than a father figure. We do see a lot of back and forth between the children. Kathy and Linton kind of have this weird relationship going on, romance kind of thing, even though Linton could never deserve Kathy in a million years, because I'm sorry, Linton is kind of worthless. Like, he can't do anything for himself, and I understand that he's sickly, but you can obviously see in some of these scenes that he's pretending to be more sickly than he is to get people to do things for him, and that's gross. So I'm sorry, but Linton, you died young. You were sickly for most of your life, and I feel bad for you, but you also suck. Both things can be true. And they were. So we have that little kind of romance between them, and they do get
married, not consensually. Heathcliff does force this upon them, and like I said, Henley really didn't like Hareton and made fun of him for his lack of education, and Kathy, she also took on that role of disliking Hareton and continued a lot of that abuse after Henley had passed away. So it's difficult because Kathy, for the most part, takes after her father, Edgar, and is really kind-hearted. And that kindness is manipulated and abused and puts her in really difficult situations. And I want to like her for that, but she really pissed me off how she treated Hareton. This boy did not ask for this lack of education. He's actually very smart. For somebody who has not been educated, who has taken it upon himself to learn to read, to teach himself to read, that to me makes him a very smart man. But she still ridicules him even when he's there trying to better himself, and it really made me mad. And she does come around. She does realize how harsh she's been, and she and Hareton end up in a relationship after Henley passes. We don't need to talk about how these guys are all cousins, because I know they are all cousins and they do marry each other, which is interesting, but it was a normal thing in this time period, so it's like I feel like I can't speak too much about it. But I do just want to acknowledge, I know they're related. I know biologically, if they were to produce offspring, that's not good. But it was a different time, and I'm not sure they knew it wasn't good back then. So yeah, I'm glad she does come around, but it does make me dislike her character. And Hareton's, like, he's certainly not perfect. Since he viewed Heathcliff as a father, he kind of went along with Heathcliff's plans. So when Heathcliff forced Catherine to stay in Wuthering Heights, or Kathy, and to stay in Wuthering Heights until she married Henley, Hareton didn't fight back on that. And at one point, he hits Kathy because of her, all these rude things that she's saying to him. That's his response, and that's not okay. I can acknowledge that. It's also explained in the book that physical abuse is the only way he knows how to fight back. And I also understand that, because it is a cycle of abuse. But Heathcliff was physically abused by Henley, so Hareton is now being physically abused by Heathcliff. And the only way that Hareton knows how to express his anger is by physically abusing others. I understand that cycle. It's still not okay. It's a cycle that can and should be broken. The fact that it has occurred does not bode well for the future relationship of Hareton and Kathy, but we don't get to see that. The book ends before they actually get married. They seem to be happy at the end of the book, but it could also be just a honeymoon phase. What occurs afterwards, I guess, is up to our interpretation. But all of this, these clusterfuck of events occurring, with marriages and people dying and being forced to marry, it all culminates in kind of Kathy and Hareton forming a bit of an alliance, and Heathcliff now losing his enjoyment in watching them suffer and in tormenting them. But he does not acknowledge that he's done anything wrong. He specifically says that he has no injustices to repent for. So he clearly does not feel that any of his revenge seeking, any of his tormenting of the people he was around, the people of Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange, were in any way a bad thing. So he dies not having felt bad for anything he's done, and feeling that he still has a love for Catherine, and that he can go and be with her now that he's gone. He dies with a grin on his face, because I guess he feels like he'll go and live happily ever after with Catherine in the afterlife. And that brings me to the ending line of this book being the only thing that leads me to think that Emily Bronte may have seen this as a romance. Because people, after he's died, there have been like rumors of people seeing his ghost and Catherine's ghost on the roads around Wuthering Heights, on the moors and stuff like that. And Lockwood, the narrator, he goes and visits the graves, and the last line of this book says, "I lingered round them under that benign sky, watched the moths fluttering among the heath and the harebells, listened to the soft wind breathing through the grass, and wondered how anyone could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth." So he believes that they're at peace. I believe they're tormenting each other in hell, just like they did in life. But that's the only thing that would maybe lend me to think that Emily Bronte viewed this relationship as romantic. But even then, like, that doesn't necessarily confirm that that's what her intention was. It may just be Lockwood's perspective, because there are some, at the beginning of the book, he does kind of write off Heathcliff's coldness as just being reserved or cautious, like things that are maybe more benign explanations. He kind of does have that air of idealism to him, and I could see that being just his perspective, him thinking, well, they went through so much in life that now they're at peace in death, and it's just kind of his ideal view of things. and not actually being the fact of the matter. And I guess to me, I don't think that she's actually saying that they're at peace. I think that that is given to you as an option, and the fact that other people are seeing these images, these ghosts around the moors, is another option. Maybe they aren't at peace. Maybe their souls still torment each other in the same place that they always have. So it's up to the reader to really decide what they think. But yeah, I think, yeah, it probably is more open-ended, and I think that that last paragraph, it's really pretty, by the way. Emily Bronte does have some nice, like, atmospheric writing, and I do think it's left to just give you two options and kind of interpret it for yourself. I don't think it's really romanticizing them the way that a lot of people seem to interpret it. But that's just me. I think that we can all acknowledge that these people don't have healthy relationships. If you want to call it a romance or a love story, then sure. But I'm here to say that this shit's not love. That's my 2 cents. That's my final thought. These people all suck, but it sure as hell was entertaining. Those are my final thoughts for Wuthering Heights. I went through a lot and spoke probably too much, but I have feelings, and those feelings do wrap up this video though. So I read 3 books. They were a bit of a roller coaster of emotions because I did have a 5-star. I love Animal Farm. I have, what did I give this, 2 stars? This sucked. And it was far too long of a book. And then I have a 3.5 that was a mess. So like this book in of itself was a roller coaster, but these ratings are also a roller coaster. But that is the end of this vlog. I'm happy to have read these 2. I'm glad that I did actually finish this book. I read the first chapter in high school and then spark noted the rest. Yeah, I'm happy about these. This one was in my car because I'm gonna get rid of it, but I had to bring it back out for the thumbnail. So I could have lived without this one. In fact, I wish I had, but I've read it. It's marked off the list. So another video down. We have officially read 14 books on the list, and that means we have 86 more to go. It's gonna take a while, but we're there, and we'll keep going. We'll eventually, after many years, get to the end of this list. But those are my thoughts on all of these 3 books that I read, and I will continue to make progress in this 100-book bucket list, and I hope you guys will follow along for that progress. See if I have the same opinions as you, or if you've read any of the books on this list. I know that I'm like probably the last person to get around to them, so we can all chat in the comments. Tell me if you think this shit is a love story. But yeah, that's it for this video, and I will be back with another one soon. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you later. Bye.